African slave trade, the biggest slave trade in the history of the world. Yeah, there are so many countries that have encountered slavery in their lives. Some of these countries are Western countries, but you can't compare them to that of Africans, which actually took about over 12 million Africans, enslaved. So it was the biggest in the history of slave trade. So this started in the early century when Europeans came to Africa and we are exchanging, and Africans were okay. Firstly, they met some elders, kinsmen, and strike a deal with them to be capturing their brothers in exchange of some material items like cup, mirror, gun. So, but you may wonder, what does an African need gun to do? But what does an African man need gun to do? We need it to kill ourselves. We need it to fight ourselves. So this is how the greedy Africans started capturing their brothers and started exchanging their fellow Africans to these Europeans. So it was something crazy. I guess they should watch this video. Just watch it.
A significant number of studies have been devoted to the transatlantic slave trade, but paradoxically, the issue of the Eastern and Trans-Saharan slave trade organized by the Arabs remains unknown. It even seems deliberately ignored. Yet the Arab slave trade, a major component of African history, lasted more than 13 centuries. It began in the early 7th century and continued in one form or another until the 1960s. Scholars have christened it a veiled genocide, attributing the tagline to the most humiliating and near-death experience slaves were subjected to, from capture in slave markets to labor fields abroad and the harrowing journey in between. In Mauritania, slavery was officially outlawed only in 2007. The deportation of Africans to the lands of Islam was structured around two main roads: the maritime traffic between the coast of East Africa and those of the Middle East on the one hand, and the trans-Saharan caravan traffic on the other. In the eastern part of the continent, Arab raids affected an area comprising the Horn of Africa, East Africa, and the Great Lakes region. Slaves captured during bloody expeditions were then transported by sea from enclaves situated on the eastern coast of the continent, between present-day Somalia and Mozambique, to the shores of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. Zanzibar would serve for centuries as a hub for this traffic. In West Africa, the Arab slave trade encompassed a vast region from the Niger Valley to the Gulf of Guinea. This traffic followed the trans-Saharan roads. The crossing could last up to 3 months with a high mortality rate due to the dire conditions of the trip. Listen to this testimony of the German explorer, Gustav Nachtigall. The poor children of the Black Countries seem to meet death here, at the last stage of a long, hopeless, and painful journey. The long journey accomplished with insufficient food and scarce water, the contrast between the rich natural resources and the humid atmosphere of their homeland and the dry and anemic air of the desert, the fatigue and the privations imposed by their masters and by the circumstances in which they find themselves, all this has gradually ruined their young strengths. The memory of their homeland that has disappeared along the way, their fear of an unknown future, the endless journey under the blows, hunger, thirst, and deadly exhaustion have paralyzed their last faculties of resistance. If the poor creatures lack strength to get up and walk again, they are simply abandoned, and their minds slowly fade under the destructive effect of the rays of the sun, hunger, and thirst. The Arab slave trade was characterized by appalling violence, castration, and rape. The men were systematically castrated to prevent them from reproducing and becoming a stock. This inhumane practice resulted in a high death rate. 6 out of 10 people who were mutilated died from their wounds in castration centers. The Arab slave trade also targeted African women and girls, who were captured and deported for use as sex slaves. According to the work of some historians, the Arab slave trade affected more than 17 million people. In the Saharan region alone, more than 9 million African captives were deported and 2 million died on the roads. This despicable phenomenon was legitimized by Islam, as Christianity would later condone the transatlantic slave trade. For example, the Tunisian Arab historian Ibn Khaldun, 1332–1406, wrote that the only peoples to accept slavery are the Negroes, because of their lower degree of humanity, their place being closer to the animal stage. The Algerian Arab theologian Ahmed al-Wankarisi, 1430 and 1431–1508, when asked to give legal and religious recommendations about how to deal with slaves who were Muslims, if it legal or not to buy and sell them, he said, if their conversion to Islam comes after the establishment of a property right on these slaves, then Islam does not demand liberation, because slavery was caused by unbelief. The state of servitude persists after the disappearance of unbelief because of its existence in the past. When they arrived at destinations, the captives were sold in the slave markets of Cairo, Baghdad, Istanbul, Mecca, and other centers. These slaves played various roles in the economy of the Muslim world. They were used as servants, harem keepers, laborers in fields, mines, and hydraulic yards, and as cannon fodder in armies. Ill treatment sometimes led slaves to rebellion. For example, the revolt of the Zanj, which occurred near the city of Basra in Iraq in 869, lasted 15 years. Under the command of Ali ibn Muhammad, slaves from East Africa and the Great Lakes region rose up, took control of many cities, and founded an embryonic state. They were defeated only in 883. The Arab slave trade had a tragic impact on the evolution of African societies. Some areas were completely devastated and depopulated. Welsh explorer Henry Morton Stanley, 1841–1904, was a horrified witness of this traffic. He wrote that after the depredations of the Arab traffickers, the black blood flows toward the north, the equator smells corpses. The Arab slave trade also promoted the development of racialist and essentialist theories that view blacks as inferior by nature. In many Arab countries, this racism still exists. For example, the same words are used to describe Africans, blacks, and slaves. The Arabs raided sub-Saharan Africa for 13 centuries without interruption. Most of the millions of men they deported have disappeared as a result of inhumane treatment. This painful page in the history of black people has apparently not been completely turned. Read a loosely translated excerpt from The Veiled Genocide, a book by Didi Ndi, a Franco-Senegalese author and anthropologist. And even as Europe, one of the key players in the African slave trade, abolished the practice hundreds of years ago, and the United States officially ended it in 1865, Arab countries continued the trade, with majority ending it late in the 20th century. In Malawi, slavery was officially criminalized in 2007, with mentions of some Arab countries currently being involved, albeit clandestinely. Even as the rest of the world realized the harm slavery did to an entire continent and made a declaration to abolish it, the Arabs protested it, and it took a lot of international trade and revolt by the slaves for them to end it. But it is the degree and intensity with which it altered the entire social, reproductive, and economic life of black people that made it more brutal and painful than the transatlantic one. The United Nations made March 23 the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and UNESCO made August 23 the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. But none such dates exists for the remembrance of the victims of the Arab-Muslim slave trade. When will an international research program address this subject? When will educational material be produced and cultural and artistic programs conducted to raise awareness of this history? When will a museum on the Arab-Muslim slave trade be established? It is indeed a sign of our times that horrors that the whole human race inflicted on each other are only attributed to Western countries. That is why when slavery is mentioned, most imagine Africans enslaved by white Americans in cotton plantations of the Western Hemisphere. But wrong is wrong, no matter who has done it. It's easy for us today to condemn those who bought and sold other human beings as livestock, but for most of human history, no one thought anything was wrong with enslaving other people. So, condemning Arabs and Muslims of the past for what they did is not to say Arabs and Muslims alive today are in some way responsible for what their forefathers did. History is what happened, not what we wish had happened. And we have to talk about the past so that we can learn from our mistakes and see the errors of our predecessors so that we who are alive today do not repeat the same mistakes.
So this is the most humiliated slave trade in the history of the world, And up till now, it still baffles me that most of this history are not being taught in school. Like the school system, the African school system has decided to abolish some of this crucial and important history. Come on, we can't talk of Africans without mentioning of how thousands and millions of Africans got enslaved and we are taken away out of Africa. So they are very important in our lives. They are very important in our history. So it still baffles me that African school systems are no longer taking up this history. I don't really know why, but it seems the government just want to abolish history in school. That's what I think. But in all that, we keep on learning, we keep on we keep on making research and bringing all our discoveries onto you. So thank you for watching and don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Peace out.